Well, welcome. This is the 76th episode of Women on Wealth. I'm Julina Ogilvie, and I have back with us today Alesandra Messineo, who is the principal at her own law firm, Alesandra Messineo Long. She represents corporations, nonprofits, small businesses, entrepreneurs, consultants, as well as individuals on all topics of wills, trust and estates, corporate contracts, general business law, nonprofit, sexual abuse matters. The list goes on. And
Oh,
she has received a bachelor's in applied science degree from New York University, Stern School of Business, graduating with a double major in international business and marketing. And then she proceeded to earn her Juris Doctorate from St. John's University School of Law. The last thing I'll mention, she is extremely active within her community in Connecticut. She's part of the Junior League of Greenwich, on the board of directors for the Dispute Settlement Center, American Red Cross, Greenwich Old Timers Athletic Association, and Friends of Greenwich Senior Center. So welcome.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me again.
Yes.
I can't believe we did this quite a while ago, and it's great to be back talking to you again.
Yeah, you might be one of my first to come back a second time. There's been a couple of others, but you were one of my first interviews when I first created the podcast. And so you and I were struggling to figure out how long ago that was, but I think it was over a
Yeah,
few years ago.
yeah, definitely.
So,
And it was great. I enjoyed doing it back then, and I think that was one of the first podcasts I had ever done either. I think I had done a couple,
yeah.
but not many at that point. So,
Well,
uh,
and I'm excited. This is kind of a continuation of when you first came on, you talked in general about the importance of estate planning.
yes.
Which is still a well-needed topic amongst so many. But today's topic is a little bit more concentrated, and it's actually a follow-up to a conversation that you and I had at an event where you were so kind to stand up and start talking to families that are preparing for college on the importance of the legal essentials that you need for being a college-bound family. And so that is the topic for today because you created a ruckus amongst the members that were there, questions that they had. So
Oh
now
boy.
we're gonna have this conversation with everyone. So I think this is extremely important for anyone that is preparing to go off to college. And I don't think this is discussed enough. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I know. It's something that several years ago I started implementing in my own practice and talking to all my friends about, or anyone who would listen, because, like anything, it's like you hear stories of things that happen and you're like, wait, this could have been prevented. We didn't have to have this stress in our lives if only we had known. So yeah, so I am really happy to share, and I implore all those families with children turning 18 and being young adults to just heed the warning and get the legal documents in place with either their attorney or myself. And I think it's money and time well spent, because it's like an insurance policy, right?
Yes.
Hopefully you don't need it.
Yeah. And these are strong warnings. And I think as you go through the examples, I'm sure you will light a fire in some of the listeners. So I think to get the conversation going, can you first talk about, in general, why wills and power of attorney and healthcare directives are such an important consideration for these families that are preparing to go off to college?
Sure. I mean, the biggest fact is that once a child turns 18, they are considered an adult in the eyes of the law. Doesn't matter that they still live in your house, or they live in a dorm room that you're paying tuition for, or they go to a vocational school, or they're out on their own and they don't go to college. They are an adult in the eyes of the law. And if something should happen to them, they don't have a natural, person to step in for them, and speak for them, because, they are their own person at that point, and they need the legal wherewithal and the documents in place to say that they can step up to the plate if needed on a legal basis with regards to either their health or their money or filing their taxes or anything that they may need from you. But most of all, I think it's most prevalent in the healthcare proxy first and foremost. That's where it comes up most often because literally some like patient portals will literally shut off access to parents when the child turns 18
Oh, wow.
because legally you're not entitled to their medical records through HIPAA laws. So they shut off the access for that. They'll still hound you for the bills and paying the
Yeah.
bills on
Yeah.
behalf of your child, but they won't allow you access to their medical records or allow you anything they don't actually sign off on, allowing you to have. So that's where the healthcare proxy really falls into play and is really super important. And in Connecticut, a lot of times we do the healthcare proxy in one document together with the living will. And the living will portion of the healthcare proxy basically says that you, 18-year-old, don't want extraordinary measures and to live on life support if you're in a terminal condition with no hope of survival. So that's the dire situation, right?
Yeah.
And, some people choose to fill out that portion and some people do not, depending upon their beliefs. But what it does do, it allows, if you're giving your parents the right to make healthcare decisions for you and be the agents for you if you can't make your own decisions for yourself. It also allows the parents to not have the doctors do extraordinary measures in the event you're in a vegetative state with no hope of survival. And they wouldn't have to then proceed to get a court order for that or something like that in the event that that was needed or necessary. So that's the heavy part of the conversation. But the other document that I think also from a healthcare perspective that one needs when they turn 18 is a simple authorization of medical records. It's a one-page document. I call it the blanket HIPAA because you can sign a HIPAA form when you go into each doctor's office, but if a child has ended up in the hospital or in the doctor's office and they haven't signed that and then they have no ability to sign that, at least you have that and you can present that to the nurses, the doctors. You can, fax it to them, you can text it to them, you can, scan it to them in the event that your child can't physically or mentally give permission for your information. So that's important. And then the other document that's really important, I think, is the durable power of attorney. Now, the durable power of attorney is a little bit more of the business document, but the way and we can talk more in depth about this, each document, but the power of attorney like would allow, let's say if you're ill, your child is ill and they're away at college and say they have to come home for 2 weeks, but they can't get into their dorm room and they can't give permission to the school to allow you to get into their dorm room. You can take that power of attorney and say, I have a power of attorney over my child's real property and tangible personal property, and I am allowed to then enter the dorm room based on this to get whatever that child may need. They may not have to move out, but they may need some items like their computer or their phone or whatever they may need from that dorm room to go home and recover for a few weeks.
Mhm.
So it just makes things easier, less red tape.
Yeah, and I think the general theme that surprises everyone is there's no longer this assumption that you, as the mother or father of a child, can control situations after they turn 18, should the need arise, right? There's no longer that
Yeah.
assumption that they can step in.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, obviously, there are reasons for that. And there are families that are very cohesive families, and that 18-year-old might want to name their mother their father. And maybe they're in an abusive family, and that is their ticket to the parents not having control, right? And
Right.
they will name an aunt or an uncle or a family friend or someone like that to then be the next person to help make decisions for them if they can't, in fact, make them themselves. So you always have to remember that it's only if they, in fact, can't make these decisions themselves. Because
Okay.
as an 18-year-old, they can say, no, no, mom and dad, you can't have the right to my psychological records or my, this record or that record.
Yeah.
Now, when we're drafting these documents, if a child does have, I say a child, a young adult
Yeah.
does have any hesitancies, which I have had that before, and they may qualify it. We may qualify things in the documents. They can be custom tailored
Mm.
for each individual, whereas it is, that's where I think, even more the consultation with an attorney and having an attorney draft these documents for you, as opposed to getting them online and doing that and maybe not executing them properly,
Yeah.
because if they're not executed properly, that's a whole nother aspect, is important, because it's also a good touch point
Yeah.
for those 18-year-olds to meet with an attorney and make it less scary for them. I love meeting with my young adults because I kind of teach them, like, I'm an attorney. Hey, I'm approachable. I'm here for you. If you need anything, and if you ever, want to change these, you can. If you ever want to revoke them, you can. Nobody's forcing you into doing this. This is your decision. So I want them to be well aware of what they're signing and what they're doing together with maybe their parents or their guardian to make their lives easier. It's all about making their lives easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you go to these online, static documents, they're not going to know your family situation. And I think
They are
that's
not.
so
No.
important. So let's dive in a little bit to each of the documents really quickly with the will. What might a college student need to consider, or a young adult that's 18, versus when you create a will for an adult?
Sure. I mean, most of my 18-year-olds do not have a will created. However, there are reasons why to have a will created. So, when I say that the documents that are necessary, I really think that the healthcare proxy and living will, the authorization of medical records, and the power of attorney are the necessary documents.
Yeah.
And in
Okay.
some cases, the will is a necessary document. And the reason, clearly a will for a 18-year-old should be, a rather simple will.
Mhm.
And, basically saying, if, I should pass away, who gets, my assets, and who is my executor of my estate. And, if there is a reason to have a trustee, who is my trustee, right? If there is a reason for a trustee. So that's assuming that the 18-year-old doesn't have a child of their own, right? I'm,
Right.
I'm making an assumption. We're talking about a single, unmarried 18-year-old that doesn't have their own child.
Fair.
Um, so it would be a simpler will. And basically a reason to have that will is, number one, if that 18-year-old has assets in their own name that wouldn't pass if they die via beneficiary. So if they don't have, if they have any types of assets that might not go via contract beneficiary, like an account that then names their parents or their siblings or their own child as a beneficiary. Say maybe they have a piece of real estate that they've inherited and it's in their own name. That would be a reason, that type of, or say they have a trust. If they might have a trust that they have from a grandparent or a parent that says that child, upon creating their own will, can dictate where the assets of that trust go if they should pass. And
Oh,
so maybe that child wants to not have it go back into the pool of siblings, and they have the power to do that, right?
right.
Maybe they want it to go to someone else, or it to go to a particular sibling or a godchild or whatever the case may be, or a charity. So those are reasons why you would create a will as a young adult.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful. And what about a power of attorney? Because this comes up a lot in terms of differentiating between a will.
So a will only takes effect when you die. When the person dies, the will takes effect. Before that, you can change it at any time. You can destroy it. You can create another one that revokes the first one, the second one, the third one. So the will doesn't take effect until you die. Whereas the power of attorney is a document that is created while you're alive and it dies with you. So once you die, the power of attorney has no power, right? So
Yep.
the person who you've named as your agent or your successor agent, pursuant to your power of attorney, is the person that can step in for you while you're alive, either, if you're incapacitated, or if not, if you give them the power to do it,
Mhm.
even if you're not incapacitated, to step in and take care of any of your business matters. And when I say business matters, there's a standard power of attorney that's out there. There is, you can do powers of attorney that are customized per person and give you particular powers.
Yeah.
Now, I do a simpler, more standard statutory power of attorney, the short form for my 18-year-olds,
Mhm.
because a more complicated one isn't really necessary. Whereas somebody who has children and a lot of accounts and a lot of assets may need a more detailed power of attorney. So the
Okay.
one that's a standard power of attorney, basically, I'll just give you some, I won't bore you with all the details, but it gives you power to deal with their real property if they own any tangible personal property, if they own a car in their own name, stocks or bonds that are in their own name, commodities, options, anything having to do with their bank accounts or financial institutions, taxes, and then personal and family maintenance. So things like that.
Yeah.
There are other things that are on the standard one, but those are the types of things that you could step in as their mother or their father or their agent that they named, whoever you might be to them, and step in and take care of for them if they can't.
Okay.
So, that might even be as simple as they're studying abroad and they can't do something that they need to do in person, and you
Mm.
need to go do it for them.
Okay.
It's not
Yeah.
something they can do electronically from whatever country that they're in. I think it's a good document to have. Again, my 18-year-olds and above, they can change it at any point in time. They get married, they do a new one, or they have a partner, they do a new one, or if their parents should pass away and they need to
Yeah.
name other family members, it can be changed at any point in time.
That's great. And do you have an example of what could go wrong if you don't have a power of attorney established?
Yeah, well, I think the power of attorney, the most common example I find with young people is the instance where they would be sick and be in the hospital. I had a situation where a student got hit by a baseball, and they playing a baseball game,
Yeah.
and was knocked unconscious. And the parents, and the healthcare thing is a whole nother story about that story, but the parents needed to get into the child's dorm room
Mm.
to get some of the child's belongings to then take them home for a period of time, because the child had a concussion, was concussed, and really was shaken up by the whole thing and really needed to go home and recover for a while. Now, without the power of attorney at the particular point in time, the school would not, 9 times out of 10, would not have allowed the parents to go into the dorm room and
Even
get,
though they're paying the tuition.
even though they're paying the tuition.
That's
Right, right. Like you don't even have access to your child's grades, even though you pay tuition. So your child needs to give you permission to get their grades.
okay.
So the two just don't coincide with one another.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And let me ask you a follow-up question, because this has come up before as well, and this may be leading into the healthcare proxy conversation. But what if a parent wants to have access to doctor records and the medication that their child is taking?
Yeah.
Is
So
that fall
that,
under a power of attorney, or is that more of a healthcare proxy?
well, the thing is that they have, and I'm not going to confuse, I mostly practice in Connecticut, New York, California, and DC, right? So a lot of different states may be different.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And they may have what's called like a financial health directive. However, in Connecticut and in New York, the healthcare proxy and the authorization of medical records really allow you to get those records that you
Okay.
would need. So that would fall under that, because in the standard form, it both in New York, which the New York power of attorney is like 18 pages long. It's extremely complicated. It does not address health issues.
Mm,
And Connecticut's does not either.
yeah.
So that's, not to say that you couldn't tailor it to be so.
Right.
More complicated ones sometimes do, but really you would be using the authorization for release and disclosure of health information, which I draft, and the living will and health care agent designation. But just to
Okay.
get those documents, I always tell my clients, you just need the authorization of health information. That one
Okay.
page document, that's a good one to use.
Okay, that's great. And the reason I was asking that question is because the situation that I was aware of, they were able to use the power of attorney. They were not in the state of Connecticut or New York. And I think it's just
Okay,
another, I think it's another example of leaning on a professional to help put these documents together,
sure.
because the states have such nuances, right? Um,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
And I think, I don't know if it's the same baseball example, but I know you have some stories as well of what can go wrong when you don't have that healthcare proxy.
Yeah, I had some clients who this was actually during COVID, who had, and of course we all know how strict everything was during
Yep.
COVID. They had talked to me about doing these documents, but then never ultimately put them into place before the child went back to school. And then they ultimately, and I mean, I have a few examples of this, so this may have not been the one that you had alluded to, but it is one that I think is simple enough to understand. But basically, the child ended up with COVID and was in the hospital, but they didn't know why the child was in the hospital.
Mm,
And so they get a call that he's in the hospital, and he's in Florida, and they wouldn't tell them. I mean, he got a very bad case of COVID, so he was rather ill, which a lot of young people were not. And they wouldn't tell the parents over the phone why he was in the hospital, what his condition was, and wouldn't tell them any details. So you can imagine how incredibly frustrating that was, that they had to then fly to Florida to get any answers, because unless they were like in their face, they weren't going to give them any answers.
yeah,
So it wasn't, so they had to go through the stress of an entire plane ride and then a car ride to get to their child in the hospital before they could get any answers. And
that's
that was incredibly
terrifying.
scary. And yes, and the same thing happened with the baseball example that I used before, because as I said, the kid got knocked out with a baseball. So the parents were like, okay, like our child is in the hospital, but how is he? Like they kind of knew from other parents why he was in the hospital, so they at least knew why, but they
Right.
didn't. They wouldn't
But the
give them.
hospital isn't sharing the information.
Right, they can't pay. Yeah, absolutely. Whereas in another instance, a more successful instance of this, where the parent, a client of mine, had these documents in place, and their child went into the hospital for an appendectomy, but they didn't know it was an emergency, right? So they find out that he was, at a water polo game. All of a sudden, he is now in the hospital, and they don't know why. They get a call that he's in the hospital, but they can't give her any details as to what his condition is and why he's in the hospital. And she was like, no, 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 you can give me all the information because I have these documents. And so the nurse was like, fine, can you send me the documents? She sent over the documents. I don't know the details of whether they were by fax or scan or whatever, but she
Yep.
sent the documents. And sure enough, the nurse called her right back and said, okay, Mrs. Blah, 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 this is what's happening, blah, 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 blah. So again, this was
They
a child
immediately had a
who,
response.
yeah, who was at school, down south, It would have taken a plane and this and that to get to the child. And at least she got an update on the condition, what was going on, that they had to do emergency surgery, that the surgery was going to happen almost immediately, and she could get on a plane, but at least know what was going on.
Okay. I love that example because it leads into another question, which is you create these documents, what do you do with them? Right? How
Yeah.
accessible should they be?
Well, I always tell my clients and my 18-year-olds, I've tried to figure out a good way to do this, but there is no great way except for what I recommend is you scan the documents. You all have them on your computers because everyone's so attached to their computers, right?
Mhm.
So you have them saved on your computer. You keep the originals in your house in a safe or something like that, or box,
Yep.
and your attorney will keep a copy. I keep a copy of them, and I keep a copy on my computer. Also, what I also have them do, and I think this is the key, is to also screenshot them.
Okay.
Screenshot them and save them somewhere on your smartphone,
Yeah.
in the notes of your smartphone, in a file, because that way, no matter where you are, that way you have them at any point in time, via your phone.
Yeah. No matter where you are, if you get that call, you're going to want an answer immediately.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Uh,
So, that's where I think that taking those screenshots, and I often tell, the children also to do it, like,
okay.
because I say keep them on your phone, and then that way, even if you're like out of sorts and whatever, you can kind of maybe pull them up and show them to the medical provider, and then the
Yeah.
medical provider can call your parents. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So,
Absolutely. No, that's great. And what about, are there any legal nuances or circumstances that need to be considered when you create these documents?
well, I mean, I think that you don't just create these documents and the person just signs them. They need to be witnessed. I always have them witnessed by two witnesses and a notary. They have to have, the proper legal provisions,
Right.
and have to be executed properly.
And each
And
state has different requirements around that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Each state, you'd have to find out from the attorney in your state, what the requirements are. But New York and Connecticut, we do two witnesses and a notary for these documents, and usually your attorney can provide those. Obviously, if you do decide to do them online, then you're going to have to find your own witnesses and find your own notary to do that.
Okay.
So I think that it's important that they are executed. I think it's also important that the young adults know exactly what they're signing
Okay. Yep.
and
And most
understand.
and most financial institutions have a notary. I know we have
Yeah,
multiple notaries in our office. And
yep,
so if they have a financial planner, they can probably help as well. So,
sure.
and what about the timing of these documents? How often should these be reviewed? Are there certain circumstances for these early young adults that we should consider changing it?
Well, I always say to them that when your circumstances change, right, for the young adults, like we all know that they're going to move a million times, right? But
Yeah.
when you're in college, your domicile is where your parents live. So, if you live in Connecticut and you get the Connecticut documents done and you go to school elsewhere, they should give the documents full faith and credit. Some of my California clients and my California slash Connecticut clients, right? Like if they live in Connecticut, but they go to school in California, they also may opt to do the California documents and the Connecticut documents just because they are so different. Um,
Okay.
that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that California institutions are not going to respect the Connecticut documents. It's just that sometimes it makes them feel better to have
Hmm.
the sets of documents.
Yeah.
But I do think that once they get like that first job and they know where they're going to be living, maybe for a period of time, that they just should consult with their attorney and say, is this just fine? Like, I mean, if they have California documents, I mean, Connecticut documents, and also if they only think they're going to live there for a year or two, they may not have to get them redone. But mostly they should get redone. Obviously, if your agents and the people you named are either no longer have capacity or
Mhm.
they've passed away.
Yeah.
So, or if you no longer have, substitute people in there. So that obviously is a reason to redo them. If you get married and you want to name your spouse, that's a reason to redo them. Big life circumstances like
Yeah.
that.
But I think it's important to bring up, as simple as it sounds, when you kind
Mhm.
of review the checklist of when they should update it. We're all living busy lives, and it's really easy just to let it go and
Well,
put
I
it
gotta
off.
say, like, when you're thinking about, you file your taxes every year, right?
Yeah.
So kind of think about it when you're thinking about your taxes, which is not a great, but that's the one thing that you have to do every year, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if think about looking at your estate documents, I'm not saying you have to look at them every year. I normally say every 3 years because
Yeah.
5 years tends to be too long. 3 years, you just want to make sure you may look at them in 3 years and be like, these are just fine. Everything's good. We're good. And great. You've looked at them, you've kind of checked that box and it's all good. But kind of like, you check your fire alarms in your house every whatever.
Mhm.
So, just kind of revisit these documents or any estate documents you may have and make sure that everything is up to date.
Yeah. This is fantastic. Thank you. It's interesting because the reason I wanted this topic to be addressed was because the big point for me is that just because we as parents are still paying bills and we're still maybe financially supporting our children, that does not mean that we are going to be able to have access or gain information once they turn 18. And I think
Right.
that's a big surprise for a lot of parents. I mean, this is a pivotal time in a family as they're getting ready to go off to school again. This is not probably going to be a priority if it's just not brought to their attention. And so that's why I wanted to have you on. The other thing that I didn't even think about that you mentioned that I really think is crucial is having these conversations with these young adults is only going to establish that cadence of having an estate plan early on and
Yeah.
continuing throughout their life, because you and I know that not nearly enough adults have the proper estate plan in place, and they don't come to us until it's too late,
Right.
right? And so
Absolutely.
I love starting, starting as young as possible. That's always a theme of mine. So thank you.
Yeah, because then it becomes something that is on your radar and something that doesn't scare you to do.
Yeah.
And, the earlier you put, your estate documents in place, and even if you have to change them over the years, which inevitably you will, at least, we all don't know what's going to happen to us from
Yeah.
one day to the next. Sadly, we had a mother pass away in her sleep that was just at a sporting event with us last weekend.
Mm.
And she was totally fine. She wasn't ill. She wasn't battling cancer. She wasn't battling anything. And she was living her life. And she went to sleep and didn't wake up. And
Wow.
we just all just don't know when that's going to happen, whether, it's a car accident or an illness or anything like that. But it's just important to have it in place, more so for your family. So I
Yeah.
always encourage, because they're the ones that are going to be dealing with it, right?
Yeah.
So to have things, it's the biggest gift that you could give to your family because it's going to be bad enough if they're grieving or if you're incapacitated in the hospital and they can't manage the things that you need them to manage.
Yeah. Exactly. Alessandra, thank you as always for your guidance, and you are a wealth of knowledge in the space, and I appreciate it. Where can anyone find you if they want to learn more?
Sure. So I have a website, and that's www.amlonglaw.com. I also, my email is aml@amlonglaw.com. And my phone number is 203-249-3601. And I am happy to discuss or share any, educational materials about this or whatever the case may be.
I know you are, and I highly encourage anyone to take you up on that offer if you have any questions. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for having me today.